Perfect. So I think the next one that we're going to cover are customer relationships, which are, it's also tightly related to your channels, right? And it's something called get, keep, grow funnel, or the strategy. So customer relationship basically describes the type of relationship that a company establishes with specific customer segment, and why those customer relationships are important, because without any customers, your business will most certainly will be dead, right? So in this section, what we're kind of going to be talking about is how you will attract customers. So will you get customers into your sales funnel, right? After that, once you acquire them and make them purchase anything, how you can actually keep those customers, right? And then the last one is how you can grow your customer at the end of the other funnel. One thing that you can see in this, in this graphic that we have there is the viral loop, which a lot of times, it's created when the customers actually have a positive experience. You delivered on what you actually promised. They see, they really understand your value proposition, and they love everything about your product. And that is when you are actually, it's more like a word of mouth, right? Like people, you don't need to spend extra dollars in order to be able to, get them through that funnel again, and again, right? Oh, question? Oh, that was just I think somebody turned it on by mistake. So kind of like going through the, this get, keep, grow funnel, I think a lot of times what you will need to realize, and I think Nir actually had a good quote on that your product needs to be 10 times better than the competition to win. And a lot of times it is because people, have certain bike. You don't see the loop. I think it's at the, Ryan, I think when you look into, I believe it's the viral loop at the bottom. So there are these like 2 arrows right under the keep customer. Okay, cool, right? Perfect. Awesome. So when talking about, if you are competing with people to actually get the, bring them to your customer and get them through that funnel, you're competing against their, current habits that they have. And a lot of times, in order for a customer to switch from one product to another, one, he needs to be really frustrated with the solution that is there, right? However, like if you are providing exactly the same value, or you are, if the products are kind of identical that you are selling, right? And there's nothing extra in order, you're not going to be buying a different product if your current product or the things that you're doing things actually work, or you think that it might be slightly better, right? You're probably going to be start looking for a product when it's really starting bothering you, and this solution that you're currently using is not necessarily working for you at all, right? So that's why it's that 10x, it needs to be 10 times better than the competition. And a lot of times, it also comes down to positioning. Some people, you might have kind of the same product. However, the value proposition that you're going to have, or the target customer that you're looking to serve, it will be a little different, right? So therefore, for that specific target customer, you will provide a 10 times better experience than the other product, which is almost the same, right? All right, so starting with getting customers. And I think like this first get customers, it's where a lot of startups are struggling the most, right? So one thing is starting thinking like, okay, how are we actually gonna bring people to our funnel, and how are we gonna get them through, right? So one of the things, there are many ways how you can actually do that. One of the things that I would recommend is reading the book Traction. And they're kind of explaining that, the 19 traction channels and what are the pros and cons of that, and like things like that, right? The one thing that, what is the problem with having so many channels right now, right? Because it's because a lot of people are utilizing these channels, right? So a lot of you mentioned that you would like to do a social media, right? if you're doing social media ads, or like building a brand, you are essentially competing with a lot of other people that are doing and targeting the same consumer, right? It really depends on the market and how crowded it is and how much competition there is. That's why you got to figure out like what is kind of your niche, right? And doing social media ads, since the marketplace is getting bigger and bigger, you get a lot of exposure. However, it comes at a greater cost these days. So just a heads up on that. So kind of the problem is, that we consumers are constantly bombarded with advertisement every single day, wherever you look into, right? Whether that's just watching movies or walking down the street or like anything else, like all the other brands are trying to get your customers or our attention, right? And a lot of that, what happens is like people tend to be a little bit more fatigued from all these advertisement. And, so that's why a lot of times what happens is now it's even harder in order to get the attention of the customer and bring them to your funnel. But there are, it's not the end of the world, and there are still ways how you can kind of position yourself. And one is, it's really, I know we kind of talked about this before, but it's really knowing your audience, right? Because it's no longer like knowing your audience is not necessarily just a competitive advantage, but is a must for a successful business, right? And better you know your audience, the better decisions you will be able to make, as well as potentially, kind of test and craft different marketing strategies that might be a little bit more effective targeting them directly, right? So what do I actually mean, like knowing your audience, right? A lot of people, when we ask them like, okay, so who's your target market, right? They start naming the demographic data, right? This is their age, this is their gender, this is their household income, this is where they're located, this is their ethnicity, and things like that. However, these days, that is not going to provide you enough information in order to successfully target these customers and provide a unique experience, right? So one of the things that you will actually need to do is start profiling and segmenting them, right? And that is more focused on, it's not just about what your customers do, but also why they do it, right? Like, what are the values? What are the motivations? What is their state of mind? What are their aspirations, right? And that can give you additional insight of how you can craft your messaging, but also what are kind of the platforms and the value that you can provide to them, right? One of the things, when we had a couple of companies that came in, when you say how would you define this group, what they would say they're millennials, right? And a lot of companies, what they do, it's a mistake, was we're gonna target millennials, right? Which is really large group, right? So therefore it is not necessarily even even you're targeting millennials, that's great. There are certain attitudes and behaviors that are kind of common for that specific group. However, there are definitely big nuances when you are looking at their interests, attitudes, where they, and kind of where they grew up, what are they actually thinking, and kind of figuring out how can you pinpoint differences that make them unique and then target those differences, right? And that goes for not just directly to consumer, but also for any customer that you're actually going to have. What you would like to do, I'm going to bring it a little closer. One way that you can do it is actually develop your buyer persona, right? And here are some of the questions that, you can answer or kind of craft it, right? So you develop this buyer persona are basically a fictional character. So this is Karen, she's a marketing manager at this company, right? This is how her everyday looks like. These are the problems that they have. These are usually the priorities that she has. These are the stresses, right? She is, motivated to do these things and things like that, right? So you really, once you develop the personas, you can actually create hypotheses about, what are the pains that they have? What are their motivations and things like that? And that will actually help you to get into their head, right? So that is kind of the tricky thing that we are trying to do here. How to engage customers, one of the things is also mapping out your customer journey of saying okay, where like what is the track that my customer is actually going to take. One of the things is that, like before, when people were buying, they usually have just 2 touch points when buying an item, right? However, today, before the consumers actually, or their customers, depends on the customer, actually buy a lot of that, like you will see an ad on Instagram, you will see ad on Facebook, I will hear from other friends before, and like hear from all these other channels before I actually make a decision to buy, right? So those are the things that, like mapping it out and creating that customer journey, and what are the touch points that you think you're gonna have with that customer, and kind of like monitoring that, and like collecting certain metrics on that you can do through, whether that's Google Analytics, the Facebook, the pixels, like there's a lot of technology that can help you streamline that. That is really worth it when you're actually starting to develop that understanding of your customer, right? And when we're deciding on all these different strategies, right, a lot of times what we're trying to figure out are these like pass-fail metrics, right? So you want to, as we were talking about lean methodology and doing, like testing, doing this hypothesis testing, and like going out to a customer, trying it out and coming back and seeing what we learn, right? The same thing you want to do when you are actually crafting your customer acquisition strategies, right? So one of the examples, you can, come up with, 5 or even 10 ideas, what you're actually going to do, and what are the customer acquisition strategies that you're going to test, right? And you're going to see how much they're going to cost, and then kind of give an estimate like, okay, what is the pass-fail metric, right? And then you're going to go out and you're going to go test this, and then coming back and seeing like, how does that actually compare to your actual expectation? And that is when you keep monitoring and making these decisions, it's a lot of times where you can see like, okay, this actually worked, this was a waste of time, and kind of like narrowing it down to those channels that are going to be more effective for your brand, as well as for your customer. And, a lot of times it might not be, social media strategy, right? Like that for certain consumers, that might not necessarily be the most effective, right? All right. Are there any questions about the get and customer acquisition strategy so far? Nope. All right. So I think, Crystal, we have still till 12 o'clock. Is that correct? Just to manage. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but we're going to take a break at 11:30. Okay. The coaches should be arriving then, and then we'll welcome them and then put them in a separate breakout room.
All right. Sounds good. Perfect. Perfect. All right. So one of the metrics to figuring out, and that I already mentioned, how to make these decisions, right, is customer acquisition cost, CAC. So it's a lot of times, especially when it comes to like the consumer products, and if you're going to be marketing online, right, it is what they call it is the actual new rent, right? You will need to it's sometimes one of the most expensive steps that you're going to have within your product, and most challenging, right? And what you got to do is actually manage that. So customer, what is the customer acquisition cost? It's just figuring out how much does it cost your company to acquire a single customer, right? That goes into that unit economics. So this will be customer acquisition cost will be part of your biggest cost, whatever they're going to be. With this example, right, like we can actually see, so we had get 5 new product releases and into Train Max. You can see that it costs you $2,000. We had like 20 inquiries. So I believe that's, each one inquiry, it will cost you like $100. But then you also got to think about it like, okay, you had those inquiries, but actually how many people actually bought your product, right? That is going to be your customer acquisition. And when you look at the second one, hand out 1,000 flyers at a biz show, that costs you 100, you may take 10 sales. So selling those, 1,000 flyers, if it's a repeatable, it will cost you basically $10 per customer, right? And then seeing like how much are you selling your product for, and if it's actually worth it. So those are kind of like the simple math that you can do in order to calculate your customer acquisition costs. I think a lot of times, it sounds like a simple math, but when you put pen to paper, a lot of times there are certain complications and questions that people have. But this is kind of like the general, formula that you would use, like your total marketing costs related to acquisition, per certain channel or strategy, divided by total customers acquired, right? What you're going to include into customer acquisition costs, right? So you're going to be asking, it's going to be that channel economics that you're going to include that, right? And how much does it cost you to acquire that customer, bring them to those channel and funnel them through, right? Here is, I think I might actually skip this one example, right? One of the things, like when you are having digital products, right? Whether you are like having like a software or selling, like a service or like anything like that online, a lot of times what you're going to manage are your conversion rates, right? And then also figuring out how many purchases you're going to be actually having, right? Like what are the price points and things like that. So just to kind of fly through that, maybe we can take 3 minutes and then see if you can pick one of your customer acquisition strategies, and let's see, kind of run the simple math of, what is, how much do you think it will cost you to acquire one customer through that one marketing channel? And I think these exercises are more what I found, but, it's easy to understand concepts, but as I mentioned, like once you actually start breaking it down, usually there are certain, questions that people have. So as you're going through the process, feel free to kind of like write your questions in the group chat, or what you can also do is just raise your hand and, kind of share with everybody.
Hey, Kate, there's a question from Spencer. Should we just guess how many customers we will get from each traction channel?
Yeah, so I would do for the exercise, in order to figure out your customer acquisition costs, it just pick one channel and analyze that, right? So I'm not sure if, at this moment, I would say guess. If you have, I don't necessarily remember if you have, Spencer, do you have what is your product again? I think, let me see. Oh, the online marketplace for fish. Yeah, so for now, and what is the channel that you're current marketing channel that you're analyzing? Or the marketing strategy? Is it the social media? Is it the email marketing? Is it social media? Okay, so one thing with the social media, right, I would think about, okay, what is going to be your ad budget, or how much are you willing to spend on, if it's like a paid social media ads, right? If it's more of unpaid social media, so like regular posts and things like that, you can, at the moment, for sake of this exercise, you can kind of estimate how many customers you will be able to get through that channel. However, there are also certain, certain stats where you can actually find for your specific, product, like how much, like what is the exposure that you will get through this channel, right? And then you figure out the conversion cost. So if you run an ad on social media, you will, let's see this example that we had here. If you run an ad on social media, right, and you will have, let's say it will reach 100,000 people, right? However, there will be just 10% that will actually come to your site, right? So what is going to be that number? So you got to be like cutting it slowly down through that funnel and through those conversion rates to figure out how many people will actually purchase after that, right? But now you can just do certain estimates, and I think that will be a good start for you to kind of like go out and then seeing what, like what are the actual numbers and trying to run some social media ads just to test it, right? Yes. So I think the question is, if the channel is a direct sales force, what will be the customer acquisition cost? Is the total hours of sales associated to acquire customers? Will it includes the marketing cost? So yes, both of that. I think when you are going through, through that one channel and whatever it takes for that salesperson and actually to sell that, sell your product, whether that's from the first touch point all the way to, like whatever that is, that will be your customer acquisition cost, right? And I think a lot of times when it comes to Salesforce, you will have certain quotas or goals, right? So you would like to have for your salesperson to actually, do those cold call leads and let's say reach out to 20 or 30 customers, right? If that will be one of the strategies. After that, what you will figure it out is, okay, from those 20 people that we cold call, there were 8 that actually responded, and then after that, from those 8, we kind of like got close to the deal with 2 and just 1 actually converted, right? So you will count the whole effort that one person took in order to get, all those 20, like all those 20 and all that effort until coming into that like one person that actually converted, right? So if the salesperson, if the salesperson, you have one salesperson that will spend, on generating leads and I don't know, let's say 100 hours and you pay them, like $10 per hour. So that's like $1,000. And from those efforts, they will just get 1 customer. Your customer acquisition cost is going to be $1,000. It's not going to be 1,000 divided by the 20 that we reached to, right? Because that's like counting the whole effort actually. All right, Peter. Customer acquisition sample for 4 coffee shops, $10 each, included sales flyers, 40. First client, Kai Coffee. Okay, perfect, no problem. We expect this 1-4 conversion rate to be an average going forward. Make that out of the market in Hawaii and then look to export to Asia. All right. Examples for coffees. So you have $10 each, including if you acquire our first client, Kai Coffee. I think, Peter, when you are talking about your coffee customer acquisition strategy, right? And now you're mentioning that your first customer is actually Kai Coffee, right? One thing, if your customer is Kai Coffee, what I would think about it is like, what does it actually take you in order to get into that, right? So that would be something similar to like the Salesforce. However, if, for you, if your goal is to actually acquire, later selling directly to consumer and seeing Kai Coffee as a potential distribution channel, not necessarily, and the marketing channels, what I would kind of like think about is, okay, through this channel, right, through Kai Coffee that we sold, how many people actually bought or tasted, like you can say like, they can track like how many people tasted the coffee and how many people from those people that tasted actually purchased the coffee, right? And seeing like what are kind of the costs associated with that, right? And you will also, like you can do certain surveys like, okay, where did they hear about it, from the flyers or anything else, right? And I think, in your case, and I think for everybody else, what's going to actually happen, like the conversion cost, as I mentioned, it's since, it's not necessarily like a straight path when you are marketing, you're utilizing multiple touch points through multiple channels. It gets a little bit challenging of actually exactly calculating that cost. What is it actually going to be? All right. Perfect. If you run a YouTube ad, you will pay 15 per view, multiplied by 100 video views. Unlimited cost of your sales, website or app is not. All right. And a plus $5 a day to maintain your website. Okay. $15 per view. Eggs. 15. Is it 15 times 20 cost of your sales? 20,000. So I think like for the YouTube channel, what I would look into, you will figure out how I would go about it to figure out customer acquisition costs. So you already have that cost per view, it's 15 cents. And then through the conversion channels and creating that funnel that you have of figuring out like, okay, how many people viewed, from people that viewed, how many actually went on our website, from people that went to our website, what percentage actually bought, right? So that's where you would calculate, like, okay, you would say, like, if we have 50 cents per view, you know, you would have like 1,000 people that will actually view that. That would be like what, $150 or whatever. And then what you would see, like, okay, what is going to be the actual conversion funnel? And you will divide 150 by the people that bought the product, not the people that actually viewed it, right? That will be your customer acquisition cost per that one channel. All right, sales platform. Sounds good. All right, so I know you also included the Travis, the day to maintain your site or web service. I think it depends on what is your platform and things like that. But sometimes, you know, a lot of those, since it's not volatile per unit basis, right? Like you will need to maintain your website or like pay, you know, just to have your website. It does not, you know, it's not necessarily per unit cost. So it does not change whether you are going to be selling 100,000 units or whether you're going to be selling one unit or have one customer, right? So just keep that in mind. Like when you are calculating this, like unit economics, a lot of times what you are focusing on are only the costs associated with that one unit. So those are the variable costs, right? So those are the costs that change. More units you sell, you know, the higher are they going to be, right? Technically. So those are the incremental costs. All right. Well, thank you everybody for sharing. And if you have any other questions, feel free to let me know. I know we're just touching the tip of the iceberg when it comes to customer acquisition costs, because it's a really complex topic, I would say so, but at least I hope this will kind of give you an overview and kind of head start on to see how you should be calculating that, right? One of the things that I see, here are some other items that you should consider for customer acquisition costs. So it's basically anything that is related of your sale of that one unit, right? So wages associated with marketing sales, and also it depends on the channel. Additional professional services used in marketing, right? Cost of all marketing and sales software and like things like that. And a lot of times, you know, when we're talking to founders, they are really discounting the time that actually goes into creating this, creating and executing this customer acquisition strategies, right? Because a lot of times you might not necessarily be paying for ads, right? But if you don't pay for ads and you kind of building your brand and do your content marketing, right? Like how much does it actually cost you, or how many hours of your time or somebody else's time it's going to cost you to write that blog post, right? And what are the conversions on that, right? How many people does it attract? How many people are gonna, you know, from that side actually like convert into being somebody that will purchase your product, right? So with that being said, you know, like time is money, right? So do not discount that. I believe you, like, even though for now at the beginning, you might be discounting your time and saying, I'm going to be doing all of this, so there are not actually any relevant costs. However, you know, that is not a sustainable strategy. And in order to think, you know, more realistically, you got to think about like, okay, how much does it going to cost you if you hire somebody, because those are the real costs that you're actually going to incur. To sum it up, you know, ultimate goal of customer acquisition is like the tracking and optimizing your conversion rates and getting people through that funnel, and getting it, you know, as efficiently as possible, right? And that can be only done if you're kind of paying attention, not just shooting in the dark, but actually looking at actual numbers. So that was the customer acquisition. Any other questions? Nope. All right. So Crystal, I'm not sure if you would like to pause before we move forward, since it's 11:29.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Let's take a break. Okay, so let's gather back at like 11:35. All right, guys, it's 11:35. So we're gonna open up the breakout room for the coaches. Do that now. Make sure this works. You probably should have gotten an invitation to join the breakout room. Is that right? Did you get one? Okay.
So I think, all right, we're back on. All right. So I think we are still on customer relationships. And one of the things that we actually covered was, how you actually get people into your sales funnel. How you gonna make them, to actually purchase your products. And then the second step is like, how are you actually going to keep your customers, right? Like once you get them through the door, you want them to keep them, because it's 5 to 10 times cheaper to keep a customer than to acquire one, right? And I like to think about it as like this analogy of actually dating, right? When you are going with somebody on a first date, like you want to be looking really nice, probably gonna go to like a little bit more pricey restaurant. You are not shying away of actually spending on that customer, and trying to make the great impression, right? But when you compare it to your date number, like 30, a lot of times, like going to Costco and getting a pizza with your significant other is definitely something that will suffice, right? So it's let's see, we have one. I think there's a question. Okay, that was Crystal. And Peter, I will get to answer your question about that you currently ask about your customer acquisition costs right after we get through like the keep customers and grow. So just wanted to let you know. Yeah, so like a lot of times when you actually get the customer to purchase from you, what you will try to do is figuring out how you can keep them in the door and let them buying, right? Because you, okay, perfect. Because, it is significantly more expensive to get a new customers than to actually keep the existing relationship, right? If you kind of, I would say, deliver on your promises that you actually made, right? So some of the retention tactics that you can use in order to like keep your customers, it's we have some loyal, and you've seen it potentially with a lot of brands. Like what are the things that keep you coming back to the same brands, right? So you have loyalty programs such as, Starbucks, like sending you downloaded this app and now they're sending you like, you can earn all these points if you're going to be going in and just buying with, with Starbucks. Or the same for airlines, right? Customer checking calls to seeing like, how are they actually doing and showing that you care for those customers. And there are many other, ways how you can retain customers, whether that's, and a lot of times that it has to do with the good customer service, right? And keep them and making them keep coming back to your brand, right? So when you're thinking through what you are, a lot of times, don't look at it from the outside perspective, but think about it from your perspective. Like, what are the things that keep you coming to the certain brands that you've been buying at over and over and over, right? And you can apply some of those learnings or some of those realizations to your brand as well. So after retention tactics, I think like once we figure out how you can actually keep the customers coming and stay with you, what you want to do is figure out how you can grow that customer base, right? So it's basically, how are you gonna be able to get more money from the same customer, right? And a lot of times, you grow customers through getting a new revenue from the same customer, or customers bringing other customers, right? Some of the tactics that include, having like, for example, a new revenue, it's, upselling certain products that you have, right? Spend 15 and get free shipping or anything like that, right? You can start developing a lot of times new products that you can start offering and testing. There can be some specials or premiums, only available to customers who meet with a sales rep or anything like that. But a lot of times when you're growing your customer base, especially early on, what you want to focus on are those early referrals, right? Of people actually, that's the most effective way how to actually build your brand, because a lot of times how we learn about new brands and how we actually transition, it's when we hear from people that we know that they had a great experience and kind of add that credibility to your brand, right? So do not underestimate that. one concept that I want to introduce when we are doing this back of a napkin math is lifetime value, right? And it's basically a revenue you expect to receive from a single customer account over the lifetime of that account with your company. And I think like customer acquisition cost and lifetime value are definitely one of the metrics that I would say any investors are looking into, right? And I kind of create the basis of your economic engine. So what, how do we actually, what goes into lifetime value, right? A lot of times, lifetime value, when it comes to, it's easier to calculate or, kind of estimate for not for the subscription products or for the software rather than it is for the direct, for the actual physical products, unless you have certain subscription model, right? So what we will be looking at when we're calculating the lifetime value on a per unit basis, right? So one thing is average value of a sale price, and also including like other expected purchases, right? Like that comes with that bundling. So you might be selling, let's say you might be selling a reusable cup, but then, what you can do is upsell it and have also people that are going to be using a reusable straw, right? Or the metal straw or anything like that, right? So saying what is the actual value of the per sale, per package that you're going to be selling. Then you look into a number of repeat transactions, right? And when you are comparing these, it's a lot of times you compare subscription models versus non-subscription models, right? With subscription models, it's pretty easy. You kind of just figure out like what is your monthly charge or whatever, the time period that you're actually charging. With non-subscription model, it's a lot of times, you will estimate these numbers when the time goes on, right? Like seeing like how many people actually return back to the store, how many people bought, some other products that we actually are, how many people actually bought because they needed to refill our product, how many people came in and bought additional services that, we provide through our website and things like that, right? So those are kind of like the things that you would be looking into. And the last one is the duration of the relationship, right? What you're going to be looking at is like how long is your contract, and how like what is kind of like your renewal, like retention, and what is your churn rate, right? So once the contract expires, basically how many people are actually coming back and how many are not purchasing or renewing that contract again. I think for a lot of times lifetime value, when it comes to incorporating the duration of the relationship, it's kind of hard to estimate. I would say if you're a software product, what I would do is kind of like estimated they're going to stay with you through 1 to 2 years. Like anything that you would be estimating, unless you have a contract length more than like 3 to 4 years, it will be pretty unrealistic at this moment, right? If you're starting completely from scratch. So that will be kind of like the components of lifetime value. Here is an example, how you can, like simple example, how you can calculate the lifetime value, right? So looking at the monthly rate, how long you have the length of the contract for 1 year, right? So that would be $250 times, 12 months. That would be value of a customer is $3,000 for that 1 year. And then after that, like you figure out that you estimate your retention rate, or if you already have those numbers, it's going to be 80%. So the returning value of that single customer of renewing for those 2-year period would be total $5,400. That is $3,000 plus, the probability that they're actually going to renew. And how, like what are you trying to do? It's kind of like decrease, like certain things, how you can increase your lifetime value, right? You increase the length of the contract, you increase the price, but all of times what it comes down to is decreasing your churn rate, right? And increasing the retention, and figure out like, okay, how are you going to actually people keep coming in and buying more things. Are there any questions about the lifetime value? Nope. All right. So I think we have only like 10 to 15 minutes and I still have a couple of things to cover. So what I would suggest is, on your own time to actually sit down and figuring out based on your revenue model and all the other components that go into your lifetime value, figuring out like, okay, how much we can realistically make from one customer, right? If you have a product that you are serving just directly, you're just selling physical product, usually the lifetime value would be equal to that one sale, unless you figure out how to bring those customers actually back, right? So when we talk about these unit economics, what is important to know, what we a lot of times look into is customer ratio between customer acquisition costs and lifetime value, right? And that's basically really important. You cannot, as a business, be losing money on acquiring the customer, losing more money to acquire the customer than, you are actually making from them, right? That does not make financial sense, right? And there were certain cases where you see like the companies actually crash because they thought like, okay, it's okay if we're gonna be losing a little bit on every transaction. However, like we're gonna make it up in volume, right? And that strategy has been proven to not necessarily work and not being feasible, right? So thinking about how you can be economically viable of starting right from the start. When we're comparing the ratio, we have 3 scenarios. When your customer acquisition is higher than your lifetime value, that's absolutely no. The second one, when it's the same as your lifetime value, this also does not make sense because, like the profit actually needs to cover a lot of other expenses, which are operational expenses, not just on a per unit basis. So you will end up still losing money. And then you have the last one is customer acquisition cost is lower than your lifetime value. There's a rule of thumb that you can use for software and recurring revenue products. Usually the ratio is around 3 to 1, right? So your customers are contributing 3 times more value than your cost to acquire them, right? And a lot of times when you have certain subscription models or anything like that, you want these costs to be recovered within the under 12 months, right? Because the longer it will take them to actually pay you, does not necessarily, put you in a tough spot when it comes to fundraising and running your business, right? So those are kind of like the rule of thumb. One of the examples that currently was not as successful when it comes to, kind of creating with these unit economics, right? I'm not sure if you heard about the brand called Brandless. What is a San Francisco-based e-commerce company that made and sold an assortment of cruelty-free products in a beauty and personal care, household, baby, and pet categories, right? So they were basically selling a lot of these perishables, and they did not want to have, any brand necessarily associated with it. However, they were a direct-to-consumer brand. What happened, they were selling all these products. Basically, their strategy was to sell each product, like whatever that is for $3, right? So therefore, they kind of adjusted the size of the product, like whatever you were saying, that the value would be for those $3. However, what happened is, and the holy grail of that was that people were supposed to actually come to the website, lured by the actual low price and then keep coming back and purchasing, right? What actually happened though is that people, it cost them a lot of money in marketing budget in order to bring people to their website and spread the awareness. However, the people were not necessarily buying as many products as much they were spending on their customer acquisition, right? So there, like the simple math did not necessarily work out. Later, they kind of increased the product price for $9, and you kind of got to look into what are the margins on your products and figure out like, okay, is this actually going to work? Perishables, a lot of times, in this case, they're really low margin products. And therefore, when you combine it with the high customer acquisition costs, it's kind of like a recipe for disaster, I would say so. So I think that kind of covers the lifetime value and the customer relationships. Are there any questions about, like any of those, the get, keep, grow strategies or, the customer acquisition cost or lifetime value? Feel free to write in the chat. All right, so Ryan asking, what would be the standard lifetime length you'd use? Ryan, it depends on your product. If you're selling software, or we can just predict based off on when we use the product. Right. Yeah. So if you're gonna be using software, I would estimate potentially like the 2 years or the 2 cycles of the. I would say, if you have a subscription, that would be 2 years. If you have certain contracts, I would potentially like kind of look into 2 renewal cycles, right? But still staying reasonably within that 2-year period, which is, it's a little bit stretched, but I would not necessarily kind of estimate it beyond that, right? And especially at the early stage, because at this point, it's literally just putting the hypotheses down and seeing, like in 2 years, and once you start selling, you will actually figure out how many people you're gonna keep. Okay, perfect. Kwang, at the beginning, can we accept lifetime value lower than customer acquisition to acquire more customers? I would try to avoid that. However, there are certain instances when that might be the case, but it should not be necessarily a long-term strategy, right? The lifetime value, what you want to prove is like those like basic economics of your business, right? So therefore, if you are doing testing, for example, and you are kind of like figuring out and learning about your customer, that is fine. But you need to have a longer term strategy of how you're actually going to switch that ratio, right? Because if you're going to be testing that and, when you're going to be spending a lot of money on your customer acquisition, if it's, it depends if the people are actually going to stay with you and how much they're going to be purchasing after, right? So if you spend a lot of time on the customer acquisition and, that proves effective, but the customers are not necessarily paying you as much, that is not sustainable, right? Therefore, you need to figure out a way how you're actually going to bring that customer acquisition cost down. And it's not, a lot of times it's not easy, right? Because as I mentioned, especially when you're using certain, social media or the ads or anything like that, a lot of times, people are really optimistic about their customer acquisition and the conversion cost that they have. And, that might lead you into spending a lot of money, however, not having a plan how to monetize it and how to increase that lifetime value, right? So my suggestion would be, if you can, right, if would be the first thing, if you're, you need to have a strategy. If you have that customer acquisition cost higher than the lifetime value, you got to figure out how in the long term you're going to increase that lifetime value going forward, right? Or how you're going to bring that customer acquisition cost down. Because that's, even when you're going to be looking for investment, that's what people are going to be looking into. Because, if you're just losing money and burning through the money with no strategy of, figuring out how to make money and make it profitable, that's really tough, right? And that, when you look at the markets, a lot of these companies, for example, like Uber, they spend a lot of money on marketing and getting that initial, customer base. But then, what it is like trying to figure out, okay, once we gonna get that one customer, how much money is he gonna get us back, right? So I think it's a fine line, but usually I would try to, as soon as you can, basically prove your customer acquisition costs will be significantly higher than your lifetime value. All right. I'm gonna speed through this. I know we have maybe 5 more minutes. Perfect. So last one is revenue streams, right? Like this is what everybody's gonna be asking you is, how are you actually making money, right? How you gonna make yourself rich and how you gonna make your investors rich. So the things when we are talking about revenue streams, there are two things or 2 components. One is your revenue stream. So that is, how do you make your money from your customer segment? Is it a subscription? Is it just like a one-time payment? Is it, like through the advertising? Like what is the kind of the strategy that goes with that? And then you have pricing. Pricing is setting out like how much money you make from each customer segment, right? Like how much is it going to cost? So as I mentioned, the revenue stream is the strategy. The pricing is the tactics that company uses to set up the price and figure out how much your customers want to pay. For revenue streams, as you can see, like there are certain examples like asset sales, renting, subscription fees, pay per user, intermediation fee, advertising, and they're just one of the few And a lot of times what you can also work on is figuring out certain combination of those. And then for the pricing, that I would say there are three major strategies, which is you will price it based on your cost and then mark it up. The second one is value pricing, and the third one is volume pricing, right? So costs, a lot of founders that we met with them, how they price themselves is based on cost, which a lot of times I believe they're missing out on additional revenue that they can actually get, because you should be pricing your product based on the value or perceived value that your product or service is actually providing to that customer, right? And in order to be able to value price, what you got to do is go out and talk to those people and get to know your customer and figure out, what is that value and how much are they willing to pay for that, right? But definitely, I would not just pigeonhole yourself into costs and doing costs and doing the markup. And the last one, is the volume pricing. It's just a basically pricing strategy that allows discounts for bulk purchases, right? So the greater number of units that you're going to have, the greater discount allowed. So those are kind of like the revenue streams and pricing, I think, on that. Are there any questions for that before we wrap up? Nope. Okay, well, if you have any additional questions? Oh, should we have more than one revenue stream? I think it is good to have more than one revenue stream, but similar with the channels, what you want to actually do is first start with that one and figuring out like what is your revenue model that you actually going to go with, right? Because, all these items like his channel, your customer acquisition strategy, your revenue stream are the things that, or the strategies that you will have in order to acquire the revenue. It's a lot of times, it takes time to develop, as well as, it can get really messy if you have like multiple of those, right? But it's also up to the testing and seeing like what actually works for you and what doesn't. Perfect. So just to wrap it up, I think like the main things, if you don't take away anything from this workshop, I think at least 5 things. It would be great if you remember. So first one, pick your one channel to start with. Don't try to conquer the world and do them all, right? Because that will cost you a lot of money, time, effort, and your sanity probably. Second one, know your audience. When you are acquiring your customers, as I mentioned, knowing your customers is not necessarily just a luxury, but it is a must in these days, right? And not knowing just their demographics, but seeing like why are they actually purchasing this product, or why are they interested in it? What are their motivations? What are their aspirations, and who they actually are? When you are 3 is when you are testing, your get, keep, grow strategy. Make sure to test, track, and optimize, right? If you're not testing, tracking, and optimizing, a lot of times it's really hard to actually make those decisions and seeing what works and what doesn't. It takes a little bit of time in order to set that up, but I can tell you it's definitely worth it. And the amount of information that you're going to gather from that, it will be invaluable. Number 4, pay close attention to your customer acquisition cost and lifetime value ratio, right? So still you want to be getting more money out of your customer than you're actually spending in order to acquire them. And then, the last one that I mentioned, set your price based on value, not necessarily cost, if you can, because, you don't want to be leaving money on the table if you have a great product that is delivering a value to a specific customer segment, right? It's a lot of times, it's a lot about finding those niche and who has that need that you are able to satisfy. And last one, I hope everybody will kind of stay home and definitely stay healthy throughout this period. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. I think if you have any additional questions, I think Crystal actually shared my email right at the beginning of the Zoom group chat. But, feel free to email me if you have any questions. And the last thing is, we're recruiting for new interns, specifically looking for graphic design and digital marketing. So if you're interested, feel free to shoot me an email and we can get you started on that process. All right. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you for spending your Saturday with us.